If you've ever walked into a room and felt like people were sizing you up before you even said a word, you're not imagining it. Because according to research from Princeton University, people make judgments about your intelligence within the first 7 seconds of meeting you. And here's what's wild. It has almost nothing to do with what you say. There are 7 specific body language signals that high IQ individuals unconsciously display. And most people who have them, they have no idea they're even doing it, which means you might be broadcasting your intelligence to everyone around you and not even realize it. Stay with me for the next 12 minutes, because I'm going to break down exactly what these signals are, why they matter, and most importantly, what they reveal about how your mind actually works. Before we get into this, I need to tell you something that might surprise you. Intelligence isn't just about what's happening in your brain. It's about how your brain communicates with your body, and that communication shows up in ways that psychology research has been studying for decades. Dr. Amy Cuddy at Harvard found that certain body language patterns are directly linked to cognitive function. Not because smart people learn to stand a certain way, but because the way their nervous system operates naturally creates these physical tells. Think about it like this. Your body is constantly broadcasting information about what's going on inside your mind. And people who are trained to read these signals, whether consciously or unconsciously, can pick up on them instantly. So here's what we're going to cover. The 7 body language signs that research links to higher intelligence, what each one reveals about how you process information, and why understanding these signals can completely change how you show up in the world. Let's start with the one that most people get completely wrong. Sign number 1, you have a more controlled blink rate. Now, before you start trying to control your blinking, hear me out. This isn't something you can fake, and it's not something you should try to manipulate. But studies show that people with higher cognitive processing speeds tend to blink less frequently when they're focused on something. Why does this happen? Because blinking interrupts visual information processing. Your brain literally shuts off input for a fraction of a second every time you blink. So when your mind is working through complex problems or analyzing information, your nervous system naturally suppresses unnecessary blinks to maximize data intake. Researchers at the University of Melbourne tracked the blink rates of participants while they solved puzzles of varying difficulty. And here's what they found. The harder the cognitive task, the slower the blink rate. But only in individuals who scored in the top 20% on intelligence assessments. Think about someone you know who's brilliant. Have you ever noticed how when they're really concentrating, they have this intense, almost unblinking stare? That's not them trying to look smart. That's their brain optimizing information processing. And here's the interesting part. This only happens during active cognitive engagement. The moment the problem is solved or the focus shifts, the blink rate returns to normal. Which means if you catch yourself doing this, it's actually a sign that your brain is in high performance mode. Sign number 2. Your hand gestures are precise and deliberate. Watch any TED Talk by a researcher or scientist. Notice something about their hands. They don't wave them around randomly. They use specific, controlled gestures that match what they're saying. This isn't rehearsed. It's actually a reflection of what psychologists call embodied cognition, the idea that your physical movements are directly connected to your thought processes. Dr. Susan Golden Meadow at the University of Chicago has spent 30 years studying gesture and cognition. Her research shows that people with higher working memory capacity use more precise, representational gestures. Not theatrical movements, but small, specific hand positions that literally map out abstract concepts in physical space. For example, when explaining a complex idea, someone with high cognitive function might use their hands to create invisible boxes or layers. They're not just talking, they're physically constructing the architecture of their thought process in the air. And here's why this matters. These gestures aren't for the audience. They're for the person speaking. Research shows that gesture actually reduces cognitive load. By externalizing abstract concepts through movement, your brain frees up processing power for deeper analysis. So if you're someone who naturally uses your hands when explaining complex ideas, even when you're alone, that's not a quirk. That's your brain using your body as an extension of your working memory. Sign number 3, you maintain an open but asymmetrical posture. This one's subtle. Most people think confident, intelligent body language means standing up straight with perfect symmetry, but research tells a different story. Studies from Stanford's Virtual Human Interaction Lab found that individuals with higher cognitive flexibility, one of the key components of intelligence, tend to adopt asymmetrical postures. One shoulder slightly higher than the other, weight shifted to one side, head tilted when listening. Why? Because cognitive flexibility is about holding multiple perspectives simultaneously, and that mental flexibility often manifests as physical flexibility. Your body literally mirrors your mind's ability to adapt and shift. Think about how you stand when you're working through a problem. Do you lean against something, shift your weight, cross and uncross your arms? That's not restlessness, that's your brain using physical movement to explore different cognitive pathways. Compare that to someone with more rigid thinking. They tend to hold fixed, symmetrical postures, not because they're more disciplined, but because their cognitive style is more linear and structured. Neither is better or worse. But if you're someone who can't seem to stand still when you're thinking, that's actually a sign of higher cognitive processing complexity. Sign number 4. Your eye contact is selective and strategic. Here's where things get interesting. There's a common myth that intelligent people make less eye contact because they're socially awkward or lost in thought, but the research shows something more nuanced. A study published in the Journal of Research in Personality found that people with higher IQs modulate their eye contact based on the cognitive demands of the conversation. When they're processing complex information, they look away. When they're communicating or receiving emotionally important information, they lock in. This isn't avoidance, it's optimization. Your brain can only handle so much simultaneous input. Eye contact is incredibly demanding cognitively because you're not just seeing, you're processing microexpressions, interpreting social cues, and managing your own facial feedback. So when someone with high intelligence needs to think deeply, they unconsciously reduce that input by breaking eye contact. But here's the key. They come back. They don't avoid eye contact altogether. They use it strategically to manage their cognitive load. If you find yourself looking away when someone asks you a hard question and then looking back when you have the answer, that's not rude. That's your brain prioritizing processing over social performance. And research shows that's actually correlated with higher fluid intelligence. Sign number 5. You have micro-expressions of concentration. Ever notice how some people's faces barely move when they're thinking, while others have all these little movements? Raised eyebrows, slight lip movements, tiny head tilts. Those micro-movements, they're not random. They're actually markers of active cognitive processing. Researchers at Carnegie Mellon used facial recognition technology to track the expressions of participants while they solved problems. What they found was fascinating. People who scored higher on cognitive assessments showed more frequent micro-expressions, particularly in the forehead and around the mouth. These aren't full facial expressions. They're tiny, split-second movements that most people never consciously notice, but they reveal that your brain is actively running simulations, testing hypotheses, and exploring possibilities internally. Think of it like your face is a display screen for your thoughts. And the more complex the thinking, the more subtle activity shows up on that screen. If someone's ever told you that you have an expressive face even when you're quiet, this might be why. Your face is literally expressing your thought process, just at a micro level. And here's something you can use. If you're trying to gauge whether someone is actually thinking deeply or just pretending to, watch for these micro expressions. Real cognitive engagement creates involuntary facial activity. Performed thinking usually results in a frozen, staged expression. Okay, quick pause. I want to ask you something. As you're listening to this, which of these signs do you recognize in yourself? Drop a comment and just tell me the number, 1 through 5, just the number, because I'm genuinely curious which of these resonates most with people. And if you're finding this valuable, hit that like button. It helps this video reach more people who might be underestimating their own intelligence. All right, let's keep going, because the next two signs are the ones that really separate high-level thinkers from everyone else. Sign number 6, you pause before responding. In a world that rewards quick responses, this one might actually feel like a weakness, but research shows it's the opposite. Dr. Daniel Kahneman, Nobel Prize winner and author of Thinking Fast and Slow, identified two modes of thinking: System 1, which is fast and intuitive, and System 2, which is slow and analytical. Most people default to System 1 in conversation. They respond immediately, based on gut reactions and social scripts. But individuals with higher analytical intelligence naturally engage System 2 more frequently, and System 2 requires time. So if you're someone who pauses before answering questions, even simple ones, that's not you being slow, that's you accessing deeper cognitive processing. You're not just responding, you're analyzing the question, considering multiple angles, and selecting the most accurate response. A study from Yale found that participants who scored in the top 15% on critical thinking assessments took an average of 2 to 3 seconds longer to respond to questions than those in the bottom 15%, not because they didn't know the answer, but because they were checking their reasoning. Now, in normal social situations, this can feel awkward. People interpret pauses as confusion or disagreement, but in contexts where accuracy matters, that pause is a sign of cognitive sophistication. If you've ever been told you think too much before responding, you're in good company. That's exactly what highly intelligent people do. Sign number 7, your physical stillness increases during complex tasks. This is the most counterintuitive one. You'd think that more brain activity would create more physical activity, but the opposite is true. Research from MIT's Brain and Cognitive Sciences Department used motion tracking to study how people move while solving problems. What they found was striking. The more cognitively demanding the task, the stiller the body became, but only in participants with higher measured intelligence. Why? Because unnecessary movement is a form of cognitive noise. When your brain is operating at high capacity, it suppresses extraneous motor activity to conserve processing power. Think about chess grandmasters. When they're deep in calculation, they become almost statue-like. That's not discipline, that's their nervous system automatically shutting down non-essential systems to maximize cognitive performance. If you're someone who goes completely still when you're working on something challenging, and people mistake it for spacing out, you're actually experiencing what neuroscientists call cognitive immersion. Your brain is so engaged that it's temporarily deprioritized physical awareness. And here's the fascinating part. This doesn't happen with everyone. People with lower cognitive capacity tend to increase fidgeting during difficult tasks, possibly as a way to self-regulate stress. But high-capacity thinkers go still. So, if someone ever tells you you're too focused or you disappear when you're working, that's actually your brain entering a high-performance state. Now, here's what I want you to understand. These 7 signs aren't something you need to develop or fake. If you have them, you have them. And they're automatic reflections of how your nervous system operates. But understanding them does 2 important things. First, it gives you permission to trust your natural patterns. If you pause before speaking, if you need to look away to think, if you get really still when you're concentrating, those aren't flaws. They're features of how your particular brain operates at its best. And second, it helps you recognize intelligence in others, because the smartest person in the room isn't always the one talking the most or the fastest. Sometimes it's the one who's blinking less, gesturing precisely, and pausing thoughtfully. Intelligence isn't about performing smart, it's about being cognitively engaged, and your body knows the difference even when your conscious mind doesn't. Here's the deeper truth. We live in a culture that often mistakes performance for intelligence. The person who speaks confidently, who never hesitates, who has a quick answer for everything, that person gets labeled as smart. But research consistently shows that actual intelligence looks different. It's quieter, it's more deliberate, it's comfortable with uncertainty and complexity. So if you've ever felt like you don't come across as smart as you actually are, maybe it's because you're measuring yourself against the wrong standard. Maybe your intelligence isn't in your performance, maybe it's in your process, and your body has been broadcasting that process all along. You just didn't know what signals to look for. One more thing before we wrap up. I want to be really clear about something. These body language signs aren't proof of intelligence. They're correlations, markers, hints. You can have all 7 of these signs and still have areas where you struggle cognitively. And you can have none of these signs and still be brilliant in ways that don't show up in traditional research. Intelligence is not one thing. It's not a single number or a fixed trait. It's a collection of cognitive abilities that show up differently in different people. But what these signs do tell us is that your body and your brain are deeply connected, and that connection is always communicating. The question is, are you paying attention? So let's recap what we've covered. The 7 body language signs linked to higher intelligence are a controlled blink rate during focus, precise and deliberate hand gestures, an open but asymmetrical posture, selective and strategic eye contact, micro-expressions of concentration, pausing before responding, and physical stillness during complex tasks. Each of these reveals something about how your brain processes information. And if you recognize yourself in some or all of these patterns, that's worth acknowledging. Not because it makes you better than anyone else, but because it gives you insight into your own cognitive style, and that insight can help you operate more effectively, communicate more confidently, and trust your own mental process more deeply. You don't need to perform intelligence, you just need to let your natural cognitive patterns show up without apologizing for them. If this video helped you see yourself differently, hit that subscribe button. Because every week, I break down the psychology behind behaviors, patterns, and traits that most people misunderstand. Drop a comment and tell me which sign surprised you most. Or share a time when you caught yourself doing one of these things. And if you want to go even deeper, check out these 2 videos. One's about the hidden signs of high emotional intelligence. The other's about cognitive patterns that predict long-term success. Both will change how you understand your own mind. Remember, your body is always telling the truth about what's happening in your brain. The question is, are you listening? Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.